morning, guys. Yes, who said Ashley Barrow says I look tired. I am tired. I've been averaging about like 4 or 5 hours of sleep a night. I don't know if you guys remember, but in the beginning of the semester, I told you that that I'm technically not Dr. Panko yet. I'm just grad student Panko. um, but I will be Dr. Panko, fingers crossed, by April 27th. So I've been finishing up my dissertation, leading up to that. It's going to be digital, so if you want, I can share the. Not that you guys want to see me lecture any more than you already see me lecture, but if you want to attend my dissertation defense, send me an email or I'll just post the link. You guys are free to attend. It's on April 27th at 1 p.m. But meanwhile, I'm finishing writing the dissertation, and so far it's at 129 pages. Yeah, of pretty dense stuff, and trying to get all the paperwork together and trying to get the presentation together. And so it's crazy because everyone else is like, oh, I have so much free time on my hands, and I'm doing all these things. It's like, meanwhile, I've been working so hard since this the quarantine kind of situation has been happening. My workload has been like double, tripled. So yes, I am tired, but I won't be tired much longer. I'll be able to get some sleep after all this is. Anyways, yes, it's almost over, and so is this class, sadly. We only have a few lectures left. Here, let me get this. Let me share the PowerPoint slide so you're not just seeing my big face. 1 second, if I can remember how to do this. I have to. Oy. I feel like every time. Oh, here we go. What is this? Yeah, share content. Share my PowerPoints. Yeah, but unfortunately, this class is also almost over, which is a good thing too. We have covered quite a bit of material, and but now we're winding down into the angiosperms. So last time you guys had your exam, sorry again for the technical difficulties. I've this whole digital process still a learning curve for me. I'm sorry about that. And now we're gonna move forward on the angiosperms, which is the last part of the course, and in fact my favorite part of the course as well. Even though I love all plants equally, the angiosperms are the big finish, as it were, of the plant kingdom. Let me make sure. Yes, I am recording. All right, so let's see what we got going on. So oops, now how do I do this? Click. No. Next. There we go. Yes, so last time we had the exam. Now we're going to move on to the angiosperms, which today, so the angiosperms will cover all the other lectures that we do. Today we're going to talk a little bit about their habits and their habitats, overall form, and the main characteristic of the phylum, which is the flower. So I always like to get situated before we move forward. So we've gone through this plant kingdom. We've really, liverworts, hornworts, mosses, they seem like so long ago, right? But no, they are. But we did the non-vascular plants. We're in the vascular plants. We have finished the gymnosperms and on to the angiosperms. And as we talked about before when we were introducing the seed plants, so the seed and the ovule are this great evolutionary leap, such that the majority of the plants that are in the plant kingdom are seed plants, right? So this is a pie chart of all of the plants in the plant kingdom. And as you can see in green, the seed plants are by far the most abundant of plants in this kingdom. And that's because the ovule and the seed work very well in terms of reproduction, and so this evolutionary advantage makes it such that that's why the majority of plants use that strategy. And even though we always say that the majority of plants that are there are seed plants, that's true, but the majority of the plants that are seed plants are angiosperms. So if you were to look at this previous slide, you have that 377,000 green part of the pie chart is the seed plants. But within that green part is this. And so, as you can see, only about 11,000 species are Gymnosperms, whereas there's, you know, so many more Angiosperms. We just as a little refresh, so Gymnosperms come from that Greek gymnos, which means naked, and sperma, which refers to seed, hence naked seed. Let's move this out of the way. And the ovules, so naked seed, right? The ovules and later seeds, after the ovules go through the whole fertilization thing, are not enclosed in an ovary. They are visible. They are exposed to the environment. They're naked, hence gymnosperms. Hello. Right? So here's our gymnosperms from before. We have two examples of cycads on the left, one of which the ovules, one of which is in a fertile crown, so they're on that what looks like a regular leaf. And then the next one is from ovules, the next one is from also cycads, but from a strobilus with the ovules visible with the naked eye, right? Naked seeds. Next, we have ginkgo. Ovules are naked and paired on a stalk. And then obviously conifers, which is to bear cones, has their ovules on cones. Right? But you can see them, you can see the ovules with the naked eye. That's the main point of gymnosperms. Whereas with angiosperms come from the Greek angion, which means vessel, and sperma, which still means seed. So it means seed in a vessel as opposed to a naked seed in a vessel. So the ovules and later the seeds are enclosed in an ovary. They are not exposed to the environment. So this is a slide we saw already when we were introducing the angiosperms and gymnosperms during the introduction to the seed lecture. On the left, you have the gymnosperm ovule, and on the right, you have the angiosperm ovule. And so on the left, familiar players already, right? We have the integument, which surrounds the megaspore, surrounds the megasporangium, aka nucellus, and there's a micropyle that lets things into that ovule, and inside is that megaspore site, which will go on through meiosis and cytokinesis to produce the spores, and eventually one will be functional and grow into that female gametophyte. All that stuff is the same in the angiosperms. The only difference now is as you can see, this pink kind of round around the ovule is this pink thing, and that pink thing is the ovary. And so now the ovule is inside a vessel, inside a structure, which is called the ovary. There'll be a few new terms since there's this whole new structure, like funiculus, which is this little pokey that holds the ovule to the ovary. But obviously like ovary wall. And the other little takeaway message here is that not only is the ovule in angiosperms better protected by this ovary, but the ovule's even more protected because it also has two integuments instead of just one integument. So super, super protected. So the angiosperms, the name of the angiosperm phylum is Magnoliophyta, and sometimes I think in the book it may say Anthophyta. Either one is fine. I like Magnoliophyta because magnolia is a flower, so I think of flowering plants, and I think of like magnolia flower. As you can see in this photo, that's a picture of one type of magnolia flower. And all members of the angiosperms bear flowers. Even if the flowers are very inconspicuous, it's still every single member, every single species that's in Magnoliophyta bears flowers. And just as a little reminder, right, the angiosperms are plants whose ovules are inside of ovaries. And then later seeds are inside of fruits, which we will cover a lot in subsequent classes. Whoops. Here we go. Okay. So here we go. Wow. Every member has a flower, and oh boy, does it. So yes, there's so much diversity in flower form in the angiosperms. This is just a tiny, tiny amount of different variation that we see in the angiosperms in terms of flowers. And part of that is because if you have 300, like close to 370,000 species of flowering plants, you can expect quite a bit of diversity in flower form. And we do see that. Part of the reason we see that, we'll talk about more in subsequent classes, has to do with the significance of this flower. So you've seen a slide like this before. So if we were to highlight here, when the angiosperms show up in evolutionary time, geological time, we see that the flowering plants appear around, based on the fossil record, around 130 million years ago. And around that same time, we see this great diversity of animal form. So we say flowers showed up around 130 million years ago. That's right around here. Ooh. Yes. Annotate. Right here is about 130 million years ago. And look, oh, wow. Oh, I didn't know I could do that. I can move the thing. Let's see if I do this. 130 million years ago, that's around here. And look who we got. We got this guy, right? We get things crawling out of the water, becoming reptiles, and then eventually mammals. Look, I didn't know I could do that. But yeah, so once flowers show up on the scene in terms of the plant kingdom evolution, then this creates this great resource for animals, and so therefore we see a lot of selection occur over time, and so flowers lead to a ton of diversity in animals as well. So what is a flower? I keep saying, everything inside of the angiosperms, or the phylum Magnoliophyta, has a flower. So what the heck is a flower? Well, a flower is actually a specialized shoot system. It's almost like a branch system. Like a leaf system. However, now the leaves are specifically modified for reproduction. So we've seen that before to some extent, in that a strobilus is also a specialized shoot system where the leaves are modified for reproduction. Meaning, on a strobilus, you wouldn't have a strobilus in nature if your goal wasn't to maximize how many sporangia you can have. And so on a strobilus, you have really, really tiny, often non-photosynthetic leaves that bear the sporangia on them. So strobilus is also kind of a specialized shoot system where the leaves are modified for reproduction. But a flower is even more specialized than that. So the flower with this specialized shoot system of modified leaves is basically there to hold those sexual reproductive structures. So there are male structures and there are female structures on flowers. And the male structures we call androcium or stamens. Either one is fine. I prefer stamens. And female structures, which is gymnosium or carpels. So flowers bear sexual reproductive structures. Male structures, androcium or stamens. Female structures, gymnosium or carpels. And as we learned in the very first lecture, we didn't learn this in the first lecture. All right. So angiosperms are the type of plant that dominates the majority of the world's ecosystem. So if you were to look at all of these different ecosystems, tropical evergreen forest, tropical deciduous forest, savanna, desert, chaparral, you name it, the dominant type of plant that is in those ecosystems are angiosperms, flowering plants. That's true for every ecosystem except the circumboreal forest, which we learned about before. So what type of plant from the plant kingdom dominates that circumboreal forest? Yay, yes, conifers. Yeah, so up in the circumboreal forest, which is shown in purple here, that's where we have conifers dominate. But otherwise, every other place, the angiosperms dominate. And this is what I was thinking about before that we had talked about in the first lecture, is that, remember we had that whole thing in the first lecture about how plants feed the world. They're the food for humankind. They're the foundation of human civilization. Well, specifically, angiosperms. Angiosperms are what are food for humankind. Angiosperms are the foundation of human civilization. The domestication of angiosperms led to civilization as we know it. And this might look familiar, right? Once humans were able to domesticate and cultivate different types of plants that are flowering plants, we're able to build civilizations. So the examples I gave in the first lecture are your rice, wheat and barley, and corn, right? Those are all examples of angiosperms. Rice, wheat, and corn are actually the fruits of grasses. And as we learned in the first lecture, we call the fruits from grasses the Caryopsis. But it's not just rice, wheat, corn that we use to fuel ourselves as food. We get so many food products from the angiosperms. We get fruits and vegetables, obviously, but other things too, like oils. You know, here we got your avocado oil, peanut oil, olive oil, and then of course all of the different spices we use to season our food. Well, not all of them, but the majority of the spices we use to season our food actually all come from angiosperms. And I don't know what parts of the lab Rajan will be using, but typically we do give a lot of examples of the different food types of things that we get from angiosperms. So in addition to food, we also use angiosperms for shelter. We build houses out of them. We make wood that we use for lumber to build houses. We also use things like bamboo or even palm to build shelters for ourselves. We also use angiosperms for clothing. So cotton is an angiosperm plant, but also linen and hemp come from angiosperm plants. A lot of plant dyes that we use are from angiosperms. Fuel, like burning wood, but also even like to some extent fossil fuels, and so many more different types of applications, right? Like brewing, medicine and drugs, flowers for personal use. So yes, tons of different things that we use the angiosperms for. Okay. So I said before at the beginning, we're going to talk about different types of habits. So remember, habit means form. Like habitat is the kind of area that it lives in, whereas habit is its form. So angiosperms have a lot of different habits. One of those habits is herbs. So herbs mean non-woody. So if you're an herbaceous plant, it means that you are not woody. It means that you never have secondary xylem. So herbaceous plants only have primary growth. Remember when we learned about growth in the many other lectures that we talked about growth? That growth is all plants have primary growth, but only some plants have secondary growth. Well, if you're an herb, right, if you're an herbaceous plant, you only have primary growth. You never have secondary growth. And therefore, you are never woody, and therefore, you never have secondary xylem. So you have the herbs. Then you have things called shrubs, and trees, and vines, which are, in this case, also called lianas. And I think yes, a little bit. So these are all, so Ashley Barrow's, whoa, where'd it go? Hold on, went away. So does that mean any plant with wood has secondary growth? Yes. Yes. Any plant that has wood has secondary growth because wood is secondary xylem. What we call wood, so if you have a wooden door or a wooden table, yes, even a shrub, yes. So any plant that has wood has secondary growth because secondary xylem is wood. We call it wood, but we might as well call it secondary xylem. Oh, I have these beautiful secondary xylem wood floor or hard secondary xylem floors, right? Or I have a wooden table, it's a secondary xylem table. Or I have a wooden door, it's a secondary xylem door. So yes, anything that has wood has secondary growth. So, right, so herbs never have wood. For example, lettuce. Lettuce is an herb. Lettuce never has wood. It only has fleshy parts, right? So it never has secondary growth. What's another one? Daffodils. Right now, if you walk around, you might be able to see a lot of daffodils or tulips growing out of the ground, right? Those don't have wood. Those don't have secondary growth. They only have primary growth. So there are examples of plants that only have primary growth and no secondary growth. These next ones, though, shrubs, trees, and lianas, always can grow wood. So shrubs are basically plants. So, that's the other thing. Herbs in general can't get all that tall in general because they don't have any secondary growth. And remember, if you're going to get super, super, super tall, eventually you also have to kind of get a little wider to be able to support getting that tall. So herbs tend not to be able to get that tall. Shrubs, trees, and lianas can get tall, and part of the reason they can get tall is because they have secondary growth. So shrubs are plants that can do secondary growth, and they can get, when we say something's a shrub, it's usually something that can grow to be about like 10 feet tall, maybe 15 feet tall, and shorter. So that's a shrub, something that never gets very, 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 very tall compared to the others. Trees, we know what a tree is, right? Again, these are all habits of the Angiosperms. And then vines, aka lianas. So vines are woody. There are some herbaceous vines, which we don't call vines. We describe them other ways. But technically, if you're talking about a vine, it has to eventually become woody. So in this picture, you see all of these kind of woody things coming down this tree. Those are all vines. And so if you think, so vines are woody structures as well. So is that true for vines and lianas that are invasive species, like those beautiful vines on a house? Okay, so I'm thinking maybe you mean like ivy or something like that. When you say is that true, what do you mean is what true? That they are woody? Well, yeah. Okay. Like, are they invasive and take over, or only some of them do that? Okay, so just because something is a vine doesn't mean that it is necessarily invasive. You can be an herb, you can be a shrub, a tree, or a vine and be invasive. It depends on your ability to take over an area. So, yes, some vines are invasive. Some trees are invasive, some shrubs are invasive, some herbs are invasive, but just because you are a vine doesn't mean you're invasive. No problem. Okay, so yeah, as I said before, these three types of habits, the shrubs, trees, and vines, are woody, which means that they have secondary xylem. Angiosperms also have other habits, including epiphytic, which we've seen many times. And so what does epiphytic means? It means it has epiphanies as it walks around. Oh yeah, I'm epiphytic. I'm a plant. Is that what it means? Or what does epiphytic mean? I know there's like 40 of you out there, so there's somebody can answer that question, I'm sure. Yay, thank you. Manuel, thank you. Yes, they can grow on trees. If you're an epiphyte, you can grow on trees. Yeah, it climbs up. Yeah, so then there also are aquatic habits and parasitic habits, which parasitic plants are super cool. Back in the day, when I was first thinking I might go on my journey to study plants, I thought of studying parasitic plants because I just thought they were super cool. So if you're a parasitic plant, oh yeah, from the documentary, the daughter plant. Yeah, so if you're a parasitic plant, it means that you have to be a parasite because you can't fend for yourself. And so as this is the case for most parasitic plants, it lacks chlorophyll, meaning it doesn't have the ability to do photosynthesis, and so it cannot make its own food. So if you see in this picture here, this is this plant, kind of looks like a mushroom, but it's not. It's a plant, and it's called Monotropa uniflora, or the ghost pipe, or the ghost plant. So that's actually a plant there. That's what it normally looks like if you're walking around in the woods. This occurs in our area, so if you're walking around the woods in Jersey or New York or Connecticut, you can come across this a lot. Anyways, it doesn't have chlorophyll, so it can't make its own food, and so it has to use special roots to crawl into other plants to be able to steal their glucose, hence a parasite. So this is not the same as a symbiotic relationship. Remember, we've seen a ton of symbiotic relationships, right? With green algae, or sorry, with cyanobacteria, with mycorrhizal fungi associating with plants. And those were all symbiotic relationships because the nostoc, right, was able to have a nice home inside of the plants, and the plants were able to get the nitrogen from the nostoc. So that is a symbiotic relationship. This, though, that we're talking about here is a parasitic relationship, and that is not a two-way relationship. In a parasitic relationship, only one of the organisms benefit. In the case here, it would be the ghost pipe would benefit, and the host that the ghost pipe was stealing glucose from would not benefit. Come on. This is another example of a parasitic plant, right? Rafflesia, or the corpse lily. So this plant, which you may have seen before in documentaries or maybe books as a child when they're talking about the largest flower on earth. So yeah, this parasitic plant, this right here is the flower, and it's like about this big, and it is the largest flowering, the largest flower in existence. There may have been, oops, well, that's fine. Okay, here we go. Sorry, my mouse pad has died, so I'm using a old school mouse, and I'm not used to using it in my small desk here. It's like not quite a lot of room, so I keep bumping it into things. Sorry about that. But yeah, largest flower on Earth. All right, so those were the habits that angiosperms occupy. Now we'll talk about the habitats, right? The places that they occupy. So as we said already in the lecture today, angiosperms dominate every habitat there is except for the circumboreal forest. So angiosperms are in the temperate and the tropical forests. They're also in deserts and sand dunes, or as we learned, xerophytic, right? Xerophyte. I'm a xerophyte. I live in a xerophytic environment, which means dry. Now my mouth is no longer xerophytic, right? Thanks, water. Okay, Yeah, so xerophytic, they live there. They live in grasslands and savannas with this little dude. And alpine regions, alpine means mountainous regions. Freshwater environments, which are not xerophytic, right? And saltwater environments too. So this picture shows a mangrove. If any of you have been down in the Caribbean or in South America or out in Micronesia, you may have been lucky, or even South Florida, lucky enough to see these types of mangroves, which are these plants that grow in salt water, and they are emergent, as we have learned before, in that they grow in the salt water. Sorry, they grow in the water, but the majority of the plant is above the water, right? But yeah, super cool. These mangroves are responsible for creating islands a lot of times. When a bunch of mangroves get together in the shallow waters, over time sediment can show up, and then next thing you know, you have a whole island there. Okay, so now we'll talk shop a little bit here, right? So angiosperms are vascular plants, so that means that their sporophyte generation is dominant and long-lived, and it means that their sporophytes are vascular, right? Vascular plants, and they have true roots, stems, and leaves. This is a diagram of a representative angiosperm sporophyte. Above the soil, you have the shoot system, right? See here, shoot system, right? Above the soil. And the shoot system is made up of stems, leaves, and flowers. Some familiar terms here, for example, the stems have nodes and internodes, which we have seen in many different lectures. The leaves have petioles and a blade or a lamina. Terminology we've also already seen. When a leaf emerges off of a stem, where it emerges from, there will be a little bud there in the leaf axil, which we call the axillary bud. And the axillary bud is going to be what produces branches. So if I were to just quickly annotate, let's go here, right? Here is, or here. Ooh, I could use so many different colors. Here's ground. And here is shoot system. So that's a stem. On this stem, there are leaves. Here's a petiole. Here is a blade. Oh yeah, look how great I draw. Blade, right? Blade or lamina. We call this area between the petiole and the stem, we call this area an axil. This is the axil of the leaf. That's what we call that area between the petiole and the stem. Can I reverse? Yes, I can. Oh no! Well, how do can I go forward? Nope. Yeah, I'm not good at this annotating. But here, okay, but very quick, sorry. I call that the axil, and that's where, so here's the stem again. Here's the petiole, here's the leaf. Remember, this is the axil, and the axillary bud is always going to occur on the stem, right in that little spot there. If the leaf were to fall off, or if there were other chemical signaling happening, at this axil is where a branch would grow, right? This is how you get branching. Anyways, we'll learn more about that in another class. Yes, so nodes and internodes, petiole and blade of leaves, axillary bud. And then, of course, growth. So we already know that primary growth occurs at the apical meristem, right? We already know that. The apical meristem happens to be at the apex of plant tissue, and so So here's our plant. What you can do is you can think of a plant as like a line, and you'll have an apical meristem at the top, which is what we see here, an apical meristem at the top of the shoot, and you'll have an apical meristem at the bottom, or an apical meristem at the root as well. So not just at the shoot, also at the root. Both sides need to elongate. Remember, what's the point of primary growth? Lengthening, getting longer. And so it has to be at the tip. If we were to look closely at the tip of the top of this shoot, right, we would see all of the different parts of primary growth occurring, right? So you have your apical meristem right in the middle, right at the tippy top of the shoot. And the apical meristem will give rise to those meristematic tissues, right? The ground meristem, the procambium, and the protoderm, which we've learned about already. And those those meristematic tissues, primary tissues, will go on to grow all of the other things, right? So like the protoderm will go on to become the epidermis, etc. Ground meristem will go on to become the cortex, right? We have a question here. Wouldn't there be apical meristems and axillary buds, or is that different? Yes. So when I say that there's that the apical meristems are at the tips, they're at the tips of anything, right? So if you have here, that's a good question. Anyway, Ashley just wants me to annotate. That's all the reason she asks questions. So if we have, here's our and this is even more fun today because I'm doing it with this mouse instead of my pad. So that's, let's see if I can move this back a little bit. It's harder. It's harder than it looks here. I got all these notes, sticky notes everywhere, making my life harder. All right, let's try this now. Yeah. So here's your plant again, right? Here's your leaf again, right? Here is your axillary bud, right? Oh, yep. Well, it's a big bud. There's a big axillary bud there. And then obviously you would have an apical meristem here, right? And another one down at the bottom at the root's tip. But if this bud were to grow into a branch, so we'll use red. Look, oh, here. Oh, I can move the bud. If this bud were to grow into a branch, that branch has to lengthen, right? That branch has to grow an epidermis. That branch has to have inside of it a cortex. That branch has to be able to grow another leaf on it. So similarly, there would be an apical meristem at the tip of this branch that was also going to give rise to all these primary tissues. So here in this diagram, I like this diagram because it kind of puts these vocabulary words in context of the plant, right? It's like you have an apical meristem, which is like, what is that even? But here we can see what it is. It's a region of growth to allow the plant to lengthen. And if the plant is going to lengthen, it has to grow new stem tissue, has to grow leaf tissue, it has to grow, and the stem tissue has different parts in it, right? Like the epidermis, like the cortex, like the vascular tissue inside. If you're going to grow more of that, you have to have a meristem. All right. What are we doing on time? Oof, time flies. Time flies when you're annotating. All right. So likewise, here we have the apical meristem at the shoot tip, but we also have the apical meristem at the root tip because the roots need to lengthen as well. So this is just showing you that you have those same tissues that I just mentioned. So, sorry. Yeah. Apical meristem, primary growth. This is how your brain should think. Apical meristem, right? What does it do? Lengthen. What tissues does it make? It makes protoderm. It makes procambium. And it makes the ground meristem. Those are what the apical meristem makes. Each of those tissues will go on to make other tissues, right? So likewise, that's happening in the shoot, also happening in the root. Here's those primary meristems again. Protoderm, ground meristem, and procambium, all happening in the root. Obviously, there's not going to be certain organs in the root, right? You're not going to have a leaf down there, but you'll still have things, tissues like cortex, tissues like vascular tissue, epidermis, things like that. Okay. Let me see how many. Okay, I think we can finish. We're going to finish. So if you don't like me just like talking about it over and over again, there you go. There's your slide that sums it all up way better and way quicker than I could ever sum it up, right? This should be refresh by this point, right? Recall, because we've talked about this a lot of different times. But the point of the previous slides are just to show you where in the plant the apical meristems are. That's the point of the previous slides. So here's we're talking angiosperm growth right now. So here's your primary tissues. Those ground meristems that those meristems that we just talked about that come from the apical meristem give rise to these primary tissues. Here are some of those primary tissues. So one of those is the epidermis, which is the dermal tissue system, right? The skin of the plant, as it were. And the epidermis has a cuticle, and it also has a stomata apparatus, right? Which is, you can say stomatal apparati for plural. You can say stomata as well. I'm totally fine with that. But it has these stomata, right, that we've seen before, which is an evolutionary leap to help with gas exchange, right? One stomata apparatus has a stoma, which is a hole, and then two guard cells to regulate the hole opening and closing. Then you have these ground tissues, right, which are made by the ground meristem. The ground tissues, which are, for example, I keep saying it, the cortex is an example of one of those ground tissues. They're made up of these different cells, which in turn serve different purposes. So you've probably seen some of these terms in lab. If you haven't, you probably will see some of these terms in lab coming up. So you might want to have this slide handy when you're doing lab, but basically these are these different cell types within the ground tissues. So you have parenchyma. So I'm going to help you learn how to say these words because they're not, it looks like parenchyma. You can say parenchyma, it's not wrong, but parenchyma is a better way. Parenchyma cells and parenchyma tissue do photosynthesis and store starch. Then you have collenchyma, which is supporting tissue, and then sclerenchyma, right? Sclerenchyma, which is supportive tissue, mainly fiber cells that give more rigidity and structure. For lecture purposes, we'll learn more about these terms later. I just want you to see them for the first time. Males arriving. Parenchyma, collenchyma, and sclerenchyma. Okay. And obviously vascular tissue in the primary growth, we have primary xylem, which in the angiosperms is vessel element cells and fiber cells, which we'll talk about another time. And then primary phloem, which is sieve tube element cells and companion cells, which we will talk about another time. But it shows up here too. Oh, right, back to the flower. it's like, hey guys, there's the flower. Oh, nope, sorry, you're talking about growth again. But no, now I'll go back to that flower. So yeah, flower, specialized shoot system, right? Bears the male and female reproductive structures. Male structures we can call androcium or stamens. Female structures we can call gynosium or the carpels. Question here. So are flowers sporophyll leaves? Also, they are monoecious? Ooh, good questions, Masahiro. So let's take that in two parts. So are flowers sporophyll leaves? Um, Not really. They're more like you can think of it more like a strobilus, as it were, because it's this whole system. It's not just like a leaf with a sporangia on it, right? It's not like that anymore. It's this whole system, which as we go forward in the next few slides, this system might become more clear. So it's not really like it's a sporophyll leaf. Part of the reason why that's also tricky is because the sporangia is now, in terms of the female structures, inside of an ovule. So if anything, you might be able to think of the ovule as a modified sporophyll leaf that has surrounded the megasporangium, maybe. But then around that ovule in the angiosperms, then you have an ovary, and then you have all these other modified leaves around that. So I like how you're thinking, but not quite. It's a little more complex than that. Second part, also, are they monoecious? Well, as we go forward, this will become more clear, but monoecious is only if you have both. Ah, yes. So you have this, they can be either monoecious or dioecious, right? Yes. And we will learn that actually in the next few slides. But I like how you guys are thinking. Okay, here is a flower. So this is that kind of, this is what I was saying, Masahiro, about that modified shoot system, right? So we have this flower. This flower example happens to have both male and female. So this flower we're looking at happens to have both, right? So this flower is on a species that is monoecious and has flowers that bear both, right? In this example. And the flower parts, some of these might look familiar to you if they still teach this in elementary school. I know that they covered this a little bit when I was in elementary school. That was a long time ago. So you have the female parts, which is the pistil, aka carpels, and the pistil. And we're going to see these terms over and over again, so don't get overwhelmed today by terms. The pistil is made up of, here, I can draw. Let's use a nicer color than just that. Let's use blue. Let's use blue. So here's your pistil. Pistil is this whole thing. This is the whole pistil right here. And it's made up of the ovary. Here's the ovary. The style. Here's the style. And the stigma. Here's the stigma, right? So that's your pistil. Then you have the stamens, which is the male part. And here let me move this away. Go away thing. Here is your stamens, right? And the stamens are an anther. Here is the anther. And a filament. Here is the filament. Don't worry, we're going to go over this more. Petals, if anything, if you're not familiar with anything on a flower, you're probably familiar with petals. Petals are the pretty things that are all around. And then sepals, which are, so if you've ever looked at a rose, like if someone's ever given you a rose, or if you've ever given somebody a rose, you know how there's like those little green leaves at the base of the flower? At the very, very base, those are the sepals. We're going to learn all about them. So here goes to Masahiro's question about, is it like a sporophyll? Not really, because it's really a modified shoot system. So here is a flower. The flower has parts, and the parts of the flower are arranged in what we call whorls. Whorls, not like the world, no, whorls. And what whorls means are circles. And there are four. There are four whorls that a flower can have. And they are from the outside in. So here is a flower, right? This is a diagram of the flower on the left. And you can see the whorls in both of these. One is from the side, right, in the diagram of flower, and one is if we did a cross section. So if we were to do a cross section through this flower and look at it underneath the microscope, this is what we would see. This is what we would see. And in this case, the flower has all 4 whorls, and the whorls are always in this order from the outside of the flower to the inside. So if we were looking at the diagram, the first whorl is the sepals. The second whorl is the petals. The third whorl is the stamens. And the fourth whorl is the carpels. So if we were to do a cross section through that and look at it underneath the microscope, we would be able to better see the 4 whorls. So whorl 1 is sepals. Here it is on the outside. This is the circles. Whorl 2 is petals. Whorl 3 is stamens. Whorl 4 is carpel. So that's why I was saying it's more complicated than thinking about it as just a leaf, because it's not really a modified leaf, it's a modified system of modified leaves. Whorls. So there are 4 total whorls that you can have. They always occur in this order. Always. Always, 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 always. From the outside in. Always. So hold on for whorls for a second. Let's talk a little bit more about these players before we move on. So pistil, or the carpels, right, is a female part of the flower. Pistil, has these parts, right? We just learned it has an ovary. Here's the ovary. I say it on the side here. Let's get out of that. Annotate. Right. So you have a stigma. Let's go in the order of the slide so it makes a little bit more sense here. I'll change colors to make it fun. So you have these 3 parts. You have a stigma. Here's the stigma, right, at this tip. And the job of the stigma is sticky. That's how I remember the stigma. Sticky stigma. So the stigma is sticky, and so the sticky stigma catches pollen. Sorry to say that 10 times fast. Sticky stigma. No. So the stigma catches pollen. And then you have this thing called the style. So these are parts of the pistil. These are parts of the female reproductive structures. Sticky stigma catches the pollen. A style, which is a tube that elevates the stigma. So here's your style. Elevating the stigma out of the flower. The style is not hollow. It's not like so I said tube. It's not like a straw. It's just a stalk, as it were. So it's not hollow like a tube. Not hollow like a tube, but it looks like a tube, and it elevates the stigma out of the flower. And then an ovary, remember, these are all parts of the female, right? Parts of the pistil, which are the female reproductive structure. And then the ovary at the base, right? So here we go. Ovary, style, and stigma are parts of the pistil. Just so you know, because you might see it in lab, is this word. You can describe the pistil or the carpels, which are the same thing, the female reproductive structures. Another thing you can call that is the gynosium, which means female house. So sometimes you might see that word, gynosium. Gynosium just means pistil or carpels. Then you have the male reproductive structures, or the stamens. Remember, the stamens are anther and filament. So here is your anther. Anther produces pollen. And then the filament is similar to the style in that it's just a stalk that elevates the anther out of the flower. Okay, those are your male parts. And similarly, another way to describe the stamens is the word androsium, which means male house. So gynosium, female house, androsium, male house, pistil, stamens. So the next whorl we'll talk about are the petals. So the petals, like I said, is the one that people are most familiar with. And they're usually the colorful, pretty part of the flower. And their job is primarily to attract pollinators. And one petal, each one of these is a petal, right? Here's a petal right here. There's a petal right here. All the petals of a single flower, we can call that a corolla. So all of the petals together, we use the word corolla to describe them. Not like Toyota, but yeah. Corolla, all the petals. And then the last whorl is the sepals. The job of the sepals is to protect the other parts of the flower as it develops. Because remember, the sepals from the outside in, the sepals are always that first whorl. They're on the outside. And so before the flower opens, the sepals are like kind of surrounding it like this, protects the flower as it develops. When the flower is getting ready to open, the first thing that's going to open will be the sepals and let the other parts of the flower be exposed. So similarly, all the petals together we can call a corolla. All of the sepals together we can call a calyx. And I know I said before about how the sepals are on the bottom of the rose, those little green things. Well, sepals aren't always green, as we can tell in this diagram. Remember, there's a lot of diversity in flowers. I like to use lily flowers, which is what these slides show, to show the parts of the flower because they're very obvious in a thing like a lily. The only downside is that the sepals on a lily look a lot like petals. Don't worry about that right now. We will learn more about why that is later. Let's just keep with this whorl thing because I want to finish this up today. Let's keep with this whorl thing. We have like 4 slides left. So we learned that there are 4 whorls of a flower. From the outside in, sepals, petals, stamens, pistil, right? If you have all 4 of those whorls, you are a complete flower. Complete flower, that's a term. Complete flower. Flowers that have all 4 whorls are complete. If you are missing one or more of those whorls, you are incomplete, an incomplete flower. So in this example shown here, or let's go back real quick, right? Brooklyn's happening outside. All 4 whorls, right? On this flower is complete. It has sepals. It has petals. It has stamens. Oops. Stay there, petal. And it has a pistil. This is a complete flower. This flower is incomplete because it's missing at least one whorl. In this case of this rue anemone, it's missing petals because in this case, the sepals look like petals. So it's hard to see, but here you don't have any sepals. Sorry, you don't have any petals. You have sepals that look like petals. Sepals, one whorl. Then you have stamens. And then in the middle, you have the pistil. So this is an incomplete flower. It only has 3 whorls, not 4. So complete, incomplete. Complete, all 4 whorls. Incomplete, missing at least 1. So we have a question here. Oh my God, so dioecious, sorry, I can't spell, it's okay. Flowers are incomplete flowers. Yes, if you are a dioecious plant, you have only male or female sex organs, your flowers have to be missing at least one whorl because they won't have both things and therefore they're incomplete. You read my mind. These are where we're going in the next slide. So, but that is true, yes. But I want you more right now to just keep these compartments. So complete flowers, all 4 whorls. Incomplete flowers, missing at least one whorl. Right? But when we're talking specifically about the sexual female and male parts of the flower, we have other terms to describe that. So you have perfect flowers and imperfect flowers. So if you are a perfect flower, you have both stamens and pistils. Only talking about those parts of the flower. If you're perfect, you have both stamens and pistils on the same flower. If you're imperfect, you're a flower that has either stamens or pistils, right? So to Ashley's question about if you're dioecious, does that mean you have a complete flower? Yes, but however, you have to think about this though. You can have, let's go back. Incomplete flowers means flowers are missing one whorl, right? So here you go. I'm going to draw a flower. It has on it petals, no sepals, just petals. And then it has stamens. And then it has a pistil. This flower has 3 whorls. So this flower is incomplete, right? It only has 3 whorls. But this flower I just drew has both male and female structures. It has pistil in red and it has stamens in blue. So even though this flower is incomplete because it's missing one whorl, it's still perfect because it has stamens and pistil. Right? That's my point. We'll talk about that more in other classes. All right, just a couple more slides. So yes, if you're only